"Ma'am, you need to step outside, right now." The officer's voice was sharp, impatient, the kind that didn't expect an answer. Evelyn Brooks gripped the arm of her worn recliner as the words hit her chest like a shove. At 82 years old, she didn't move fast anymore. Her knees ached, her back burned, and this morning the arthritis in her hands felt especially cruel. Outside her front window, two police cruisers sat in her driveway, red and blue lights flashing against the white siding of the house she had lived in for over 60 years. Her house, not a property, not a structure, not a disputed asset. Her home. "Ma'am, I said step outside," the younger officer repeated, louder this time, his hand resting near his belt. Evelyn rose slowly, using the coffee table to steady herself. The living room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. Family photos lined the walls, black and white memories of birthdays, graduations, church picnics, and one wedding portrait from 1963 where she and her late husband stood proud in their Sunday best. "I'm coming," she said, her voice calm but tired. "You don't have to bark at me like that." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, an older man with gray at his temples and a face that looked less comfortable with what was happening. "Mrs. Brooks," the older officer said, trying to soften the moment, "we just need you to cooperate." Evelyn opened the front door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the sound of a growing crowd. Neighbors had stepped onto their porches, some whispered, some filmed with their phones, others simply watched, arms folded, unsure what they were witnessing but certain it didn't feel right. "What's this about?" Evelyn asked. The younger officer pulled out a clipboard. "This property is scheduled for repossession. The bank claims you are unlawfully occupying the residence." Evelyn blinked once, then again. "Unlawfully?" she repeated. "Yes, ma'am. According to records, the mortgage hasn't been valid for decades." Her heart skipped, not from fear, but from disbelief. "That's impossible," she said quietly. "This house was paid off before that boy you work with was born." The younger officer scoffed. "That's not what the paperwork says." Evelyn straightened her shoulders. "I've been living here since 1962. My husband and I bought this place with our own hands and our own money." The officer sighed like she was wasting his time. "Ma'am, I'm not here to argue history. I'm here to enforce an eviction order." Eviction. The word landed heavier than anything else. Evelyn felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the same feeling she'd had the day her husband passed, the day she buried her youngest sister, the day the city tore down her childhood neighborhood for a highway no one asked for. She looked past the officers, at her mailbox with the faded numbers she'd repainted herself every few years, at the oak tree her children climbed in the 70s, at the porch step Samuel fixed after it cracked in '89. "This is my home," she said again. The younger officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, if you don't exit the property willingly, we'll be forced to assist you." Assist. The word was polished, clean, empty. Evelyn felt her pulse in her ears. "You mean drag me out," she said. A few neighbors gasped. The older officer shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Brooks, let's just take a breath." "No," Evelyn said, her voice firmer now. "You listen to me." She reached for the doorframe, steadying herself. "I raised 3 children in this house. I paid taxes on this land longer than either of you have been alive, and I am not leaving it because some bank decided to rewrite history." The younger officer's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, last warning." Something in Evelyn snapped, not into anger, but into resolve. She turned slowly back inside. "Where are you going?" the officer barked. "To get my proof," she said. "Ma'am, you can't." Evelyn ignored him. She walked carefully down the hallway, each step deliberate. The officers followed, their boots heavy against her wooden floor. She stopped at the back bedroom, the one she hadn't changed since Samuel died. A cedar chest sat at the foot of the bed. She knelt, slowly, painfully, and lifted the lid. Inside were folded documents wrapped in yellowed cloth, tied with a ribbon so faded it was almost white. The younger officer snorted. "Old papers don't change legal reality, ma'am." Evelyn didn't look at him. She lifted the bundle and carried it back to the living room. "These papers," she said softly, "are older than your system." She untied the ribbon. Inside lay a deed, thick paper, official seal, ink faded but intact. She handed it to the older officer. He took it reluctantly, then froze. His eyes scanned the page, then scanned again. His brow furrowed. "What is it?" the younger officer asked. The older officer swallowed. This is a deed." "So?" the younger snapped. "Dated June 14th, 1962. The air changed. The younger officer stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. The crowd outside leaned in. Evelyn stood silently, hands folded. The older officer read aloud. "Purchased outright, no lien, no mortgage, transferred and recorded." He looked up at Evelyn. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "this deed predates the bank's claim by 30 years. The younger officer's face drained of color. "That's not possible," he muttered. "The bank wouldn't—" "Wouldn't what?" Evelyn asked calmly. "Lie?" Silence filled the room. The neighbors outside stopped whispering. The older officer closed the folder carefully. "We need to make some calls," he said. The younger officer backed away, suddenly unsure. Evelyn remained standing in the center of her living room, still, unmoved, unbroken. And for the first time that morning, the officers no longer looked like they were in charge.
The older officer stepped aside, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but urgent. "Yes, sir. I understand. No, this isn't a copy. It appears to be the original deed." Evelyn Brooks sat back down in her recliner, her legs trembling now that the adrenaline had begun to fade. She folded her hands in her lap the way her mother taught her, calm on the outside, no matter what storm was passing through you. Across the room, the younger officer stood stiffly near the door, eyes fixed anywhere but on her. Outside, the flashing lights still painted the neighborhood in red and blue. A few more neighbors had gathered. Someone whispered, "That's Miss Evelyn." Another voice said, "She's lived there forever." The older officer ended the call and turned slowly. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, clearing his throat, "there appears to be a discrepancy." Evelyn raised one eyebrow. "That's a polite word for it." He nodded. "The bank's claim is based on a digital title transfer that happened in the early 2000s. According to their records, this property was flagged as unclaimed during a system update." "Unclaimed?" Evelyn repeated. "I was right here." "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly, "but many older properties were entered manually back then. If paperwork wasn't digitized properly, things were overwritten." The younger officer scoffed. "You're telling me a whole house just disappears?" The older officer shot him a look. "I'm telling you it happens more often than people think." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "So let me understand," she said. "A computer decided my life didn't exist." No one answered. The officer continued. "Once the system marked the property as dormant, the bank assumed ownership reverted due to unpaid liens." "I never missed a tax payment," Evelyn said. "That appears to be true," he replied, "but the lien they reference isn't yours." He hesitated. "It belonged to a neighboring property that was demolished in 1978. Evelyn let out a slow breath. "That was the Johnsons' house. The city took it for that freeway exit." The officer nodded. "Somewhere along the way, the parcel numbers were merged incorrectly." The younger officer shifted his weight. "So the bank just took it?" "On paper," the older officer said, "yes." Evelyn stared at the wall, at a framed photo of Samuel holding their youngest son on his shoulders. "My husband worked 2 jobs to buy this place outright. He died believing this house would always protect me." The room was quiet. The older officer cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Brooks, we're suspending enforcement. No one is removing you today." A ripple of relief moved through the neighbors outside. "But," he added carefully, "this won't end here." Evelyn nodded. "I didn't think it would." He handed the deed back to her, almost reverently. "I strongly recommend you contact an attorney." She smiled faintly. "Already have one in mind." The officers stepped outside, radios crackling as they called their supervisor. The younger officer avoided eye contact as he left. Evelyn sat alone for a moment, listening to the familiar creaks of her home. The house seemed to breathe with her. Then her phone rang. She frowned. Hardly anyone called her anymore. "Hello? Mrs. Brooks, this is Harold Fenwick from Northern Trust Property Management." Evelyn's grip tightened. "We've been notified of an incident at your residence this morning." "Incident? You sent police to throw me out of my house." There was a pause. "According to our records, the property is under bank possession. Your records are wrong." Another pause, longer this time. "Our system shows... My system shows a deed dated 1962. He inhaled sharply. "That document is outdated. Funny, it's held up longer than your computers." His voice hardened. "Mrs. Brooks, we can resolve this quietly if you cooperate." "Cooperate how?" "Sign a temporary relocation agreement. We'll house you elsewhere while the matter is reviewed." Evelyn laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You mean disappear, so it's easier to take what you want." "That's not—" "You already tried to take it with police," she said calmly. "Now you want me gone." Silence crackled on the line. "We're offering a generous settlement." "My home is not a settlement." "Mrs. Brooks," Fenwick said, irritation creeping in, "you're an elderly woman. Legal battles are stressful, costly. You could enjoy peace elsewhere." "I have peace," Evelyn replied, "right here." His voice cooled. "Then you leave us no choice." "You already made yours." She hung up. Her hands trembled now, not with fear, but with anger. She picked up the phone again and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "James?" she said when someone answered. "It's Evelyn Brooks." "Yes, Samuel's wife." A pause. Then a warm voice. "Miss Evelyn, how are you?" "They tried to steal my house." Another pause, heavier this time. "They did now," James said quietly. "Then it's time." By afternoon, a black sedan pulled up in front of the house. A tall man in a worn suit stepped out, briefcase in hand. James Carter, civil rights attorney, retired, and one of the few lawyers in the city who remembered when deeds were paper and justice wasn't digital. He stepped inside and listened as Evelyn laid out everything. When she finished, he opened the cedar chest himself. He examined the deeds slowly, then the tax receipts, then the property map. He closed the folder and looked at her. "They messed up. Badly." Evelyn nodded. "I figured. This isn't just a clerical error. This is systemic negligence, possibly fraud. Can they still take it?" He shook his head. "Not if we stop them." "And can we?" James smiled, not kindly, but fiercely. "Oh, yes," he said, "and when we do, they're going to wish they'd never knocked on your door." Outside, a news van rolled slowly past. Someone had already posted video of the police confrontation. The comments were spreading, and for the first time, the bank realized something dangerous. They hadn't just made a mistake, they'd chosen the wrong woman, and she remembered everything.
By sunset, Evelyn Brooks's front yard no longer belonged to her alone. Cars slowed as they passed, some stopping outright. Neighbors stood on sidewalks in house slippers and folding chairs, murmuring in low, unsettled voices. Someone had brought a thermos of coffee. Another held a phone aloft, scrolling, eyes widening. "What's going on over there?" "That's Miss Evelyn's house. The police tried to put her out." "Put her out? She'd been there since Kennedy." The video had spread faster than anyone expected. A shaky clip filmed from across the street showed two police cruisers, flashing lights, and an elderly black woman standing firm in her doorway, holding a yellowed piece of paper like it was a shield.
You could hear one officer's raised voice, you could hear Evelyn's calm reply, and you could hear the moment the tone shifted when the officers realized they might be wrong. That clip hit Facebook first, then YouTube, then TikTok, where someone added text across the screen. They tried to evict a 78-year-old woman until she pulled out a deed from 1962. Within hours, it had thousands of shares. Evelyn didn't know any of that yet. She sat at her kitchen table with James Carter, the attorney, while the house hummed softly around them. The kettle whistled, the clock ticked, familiar sounds anchoring her. "They're circling," James said, peering out the front window. "Media, activists, and people who remember." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Good. Maybe they'll remember how to act right." There was a knock at the door. James stood. "I'll handle it." But Evelyn was already rising. "No, this is my house." She opened the door to find Mrs. Lillian Turner from next door clutching a casserole dish. "I brought food," Lillian said, eyes shining. "Figured you might not feel like cooking after all that." Evelyn took the dish gently. "Thank you, baby." Behind Lillian stood Mr. Harris from across the street, leaning on his cane. "Heard what happened. This ain't right, not one bit." More neighbors gathered, some stepping onto the porch, others staying at the edge of the yard like they weren't sure if they were allowed to cross an invisible line. A young woman raised her phone. "Miss Evelyn, is it okay if I ask you something?" Evelyn nodded. "Go ahead." "How long you lived here?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. 62 years, longer than most of these banks been alive. Murmurs rippled through the group. Another neighbor spoke up. "My mama used to bring pies to your house, said you and your husband were the first black family on this block." "That's true," Evelyn said, "and not everyone welcomed us." A silence fell, heavy, knowing. A man near the back muttered, "And now they think they can just take it." James stepped forward. "Make no mistake," he said clearly, "this is not an eviction. This is an attempted seizure based on flawed records." "Is that legal?" someone asked. James's jaw tightened. "They count on people not fighting back." Evelyn placed the casserole on the table behind her and turned back to the crowd. "They thought I wouldn't understand what they were doing. They thought I'd be scared." Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. "But I buried my husband in this house. I raised my children here. I watched this neighborhood change, some for better, some for worse, and I'm not leaving." Applause broke out, not loud, but steady, respectful. A news van finally pulled up, logo splashed across its side. A reporter hopped out, microphone already in hand. "Mrs. Brooks, can we get a comment?" James opened his mouth, but Evelyn raised a hand. "Yes," she said simply. The reporter stepped closer. "Can you tell us what happened this morning?" Evelyn looked straight into the camera. "They tried to take my home, and they would have if I didn't keep my papers." The reporter blinked. "You're saying this could happen to others?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Already has." That clip aired on the 6 o'clock news. By nightfall, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't the bank. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Angela Morris from the City Housing Office. We've been alerted to a potential title error affecting your property." Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "You don't say." "We're launching an internal review, and we'd like to ensure your housing security during this process." "I'm secure in my own house." A pause. Of course. After the call, James shook his head. "They move fast when cameras show up." Evelyn smiled sadly. "They move fastest when they're embarrassed." Outside, neighbors lingered longer than usual. Porch lights stayed on. Conversations stretched past bedtime. For some, this wasn't just about Evelyn. It was about their parents, their grandparents, their own homes. Mrs. Turner whispered to another neighbor, "You know they tried something like this with my cousin last year." Mr. Harris nodded grimly. "Happening all over." Social media lit up with stories. A man in Detroit commented about his aunt losing her home over a digitized error. A woman in Georgia shared how her parents' land was seized after a missing document. Veterans, widows, retirees, all with paperwork, all told it wasn't enough. Evelyn's granddaughter called from out of state, voice shaking.
"Grandma, I saw it online." "I'm all right," Evelyn said gently. "I've been through worse." Later that night, as the neighborhood finally quieted, James packed his briefcase. "They'll escalate," he warned. "The bank won't back down easily." Evelyn nodded. "Neither will I." He paused at the door. "You know what scares them most?" "What?" "People remembering they have rights." After he left, Evelyn walked through her house slowly. She touched the doorframe Samuel had measured the kids against, the window where she used to watch them play, the spot in the living room where she danced alone after her husband died, refusing to let grief steal the space too. Outside, a patrol car rolled past, slower now. Inside, Evelyn sat in her recliner, the deed resting on her lap. The neighborhood had spoken, and the message was clear. This wasn't just one woman's fight anymore. It was everyone's.
The next morning didn't arrive gently. It came with engines, footsteps, and the low murmur of voices that carried authority, the kind that made people straighten their backs whether they wanted to or not. Evelyn Brooks was already awake. She had slept lightly in her recliner, the deed from 1962 folded carefully beside her Bible. She hadn't moved it all night. Not out of fear it would disappear, but because holding it close reminded her who she was. A homeowner. Not a tenant, not a squatter, not a mistake in the system. A homeowner. When the knock came this time, it wasn't tentative. It was firm, official, practiced. Evelyn rose slowly, knees stiff, spine straight. She didn't rush. She never rushed for anyone anymore. Through the front window, she saw them. Two men in suits standing just behind a uniformed police officer, one woman holding a clipboard, another cruiser parked down the street, engine idling. The neighborhood noticed immediately. Curtains shifted, doors cracked open. Mrs. Turner stepped onto her porch with her arms crossed, lips pressed thin. Evelyn opened the door. "Yes?" she said calmly. The officer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Evelyn Brooks?" "That's me." "I'm Officer Reed. These representatives are from Stonebridge Financial." Evelyn's eyes flicked to the suits. Young, clean, polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Mrs. Brooks," the taller man began, "we're here to resolve a documentation discrepancy regarding this property." Evelyn tilted her head. "Resolve how?" He gestured vaguely toward the house. "By confirming rightful ownership." Evelyn smiled, not warmly, but knowingly. "You already tried that yesterday." The shorter man adjusted his tie. "Yesterday was preliminary." "And today?" she asked. "Today," the woman with the clipboard said, "we're here with updated records." Evelyn stepped back slightly, opening the door wider. "Then come in. You'll need a table." They hesitated. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. Sunlight poured across the worn hardwood floors, catching on framed photos lining the walls, graduations, weddings, Sunday hats, military uniforms. This was not a place that belonged to someone else. They sat at the dining table where Evelyn had signed school permission slips and folded bills for decades. James Carter arrived moments later, briefcase in hand, jaw set. "I was hoping you'd wait for counsel," he said coolly. The taller man forced a smile. "We're just clarifying records." James pulled out a chair. "Then clarify." The woman opened her folder. "According to our digitized archives, this property's lien status was unresolved following a mortgage restructuring in the early 1990s. Evelyn folded her hands. "I paid off my mortgage in 1997. "Yes, but the digital conversion lost something," James finished. The taller man stiffened. "We prefer to say misfiled." Evelyn reached into her purse. The room seemed to hold its breath. She laid the deed on the table. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't glow. It didn't slam down. It simply existed. Yellowed, typed, signed, dated. James slid it toward the suits. "Original deed, filed with the county clerk, verified yesterday." The woman blinked. "That's quite old." Evelyn's voice was steady. "So am I." The taller man leaned forward,
eyes narrowing as he read. You see, James continued, before digitization, property ownership relied on physical records, records that don't disappear because a database forgets them. Silence. The officer shifted his weight uncomfortably. The shorter man spoke up. With respect, this document doesn't reflect subsequent financial activity. Evelyn met his gaze. Son, she said gently, that paper has survived 3 presidents, 2 recessions, and a stroke. It reflects plenty. James tapped the date. There is no legal basis for eviction, none. This property is free and clear. The woman's fingers trembled slightly as she flipped pages. That's not what our system shows. Evelyn leaned forward. Your system doesn't live here. I do. Outside, voices were growing louder. Someone had started filming again. Mrs. Turner's voice carried through the open window. That's her house. The officer cleared his throat again. Ma'am, perhaps we should step outside. Evelyn nodded. Perhaps you should. They filed out slowly, tension clinging to them like a humidity. On the porch, neighbors had gathered, more than yesterday. Some held phones, others just stood, arms crossed, silent witnesses. The reporter from last night was back, microphone poised. Mrs. Brooks, what's happening now? Evelyn stepped forward, deed in hand. They're learning to read, she said. The reporter blinked. The deed? 1962. My husband and I bought this home fair and square. The taller man tried to interject. We're still reviewing. James stepped beside Evelyn. There is nothing to review. Camera zoomed in. Officer Reed glanced between the suits in the crowd. I see no legal grounds for removal, he said carefully. The woman with the clipboard swallowed hard. We'll need to escalate this internally. Evelyn nodded. Do that. The suits retreated down the steps, no longer confident, no longer in control. As they reached the sidewalk, the taller man muttered, This isn't over. Evelyn heard him. She smiled faintly. It never is. By afternoon, the county clerk's office confirmed it publicly. The deed was valid. The title was clean. The bank's claim was unfounded. But the story didn't stop. It grew. Talk radio picked it up. Morning shows debated it. Viewers called in, voices shaking with recognition. I kept my papers too, one woman said. They tried the same thing with my uncle, said another. Why does this keep happening to seniors? Asked the third. At sunset, Evelyn sat on her porch as neighbors drifted home. Mrs. Turner squeezed her hand. You scared them. Evelyn chuckled softly. No, I reminded them. Inside, she placed the deed back in its envelope. Not hidden, not locked away, just returned to its place. Because papers matter, and so do the people who keep them. But far away, in a quiet office filled with glass and steel, someone at Stonebridge Financial stared at a screen, jaw clenched. This mistake had become a problem, and problems like Evelyn Brooks didn't disappear quietly. They fought back, and tomorrow the bank would decide how far it was willing to go. The question was no longer whether Evelyn owned her home. The question was how many others had almost lost theirs before she stood her ground.
By the next morning, Evelyn Brooks's name was everywhere. It drifted through radio waves during breakfast hours. It crawled across television tickers in bold white letters. It sat in the comments sections of local news pages, carried by thousands of voices that sounded eerily alike. That could have been my mother. This happened to my grandfather. They tried this in our neighborhood too. Evelyn didn't own a smartphone. She didn't watch cable news before noon. She learned what was happening the same way she always had, through people. Mrs. Turner knocked just after 9, breathless, holding a folded newspaper. Evelyn, she said, eyes wide, you're on the front page. Evelyn set her teacup down slowly. Again? Mrs. Turner handed it over. The headline read, Elderly homeowner almost evicted over bank error. Deed from 1962 proves ownership. Below it was a photo taken the day before.
Evelyn on her porch, deed in hand, chin lifted, eyes steady. She stared at it for a long moment. "I didn't ask for all this," Evelyn said quietly. "No, but Lord knows we needed it." Across town, in a high-rise office that smelled like polished wood and ambition, Stonebridge Financial was having a very different morning. Executives crowded into a glass-walled conference room. Screens glowed with news clips, social media feeds, and internal emails marked urgent. "This was supposed to be routine," a man in a navy suit snapped. "One property, one correction." A woman near the head of the table rubbed her temples. "It's never just one when it's this demographic." Someone else cleared his throat. "We underestimated her." Silence followed. On one screen, a clip replayed of Evelyn speaking calmly to reporters. "I've lived here 60 years. Papers don't lie. People do." The CEO exhaled sharply. "Damage control." "But sir," a junior analyst said hesitantly, "the deeper issue is the archive." All eyes turned. The digitization project from the early 2000s, it flagged hundreds of properties as inconclusive, mostly older homes, mostly owned by seniors. The room tightened. "How many?" the CEO asked. The analyst swallowed. "Enough." Back on Magnolia Street, Evelyn was doing what she always did, tending her roses. The attention hadn't changed to routine. She moved carefully, pruning shears steady in her hands. The roses had bloomed here longer than most people in the neighborhood had lived. A black sedan slowed near the curb. Evelyn noticed immediately. It didn't belong. Two people stepped out, a man and a woman, both dressed too neatly for the block. They approached with smiles practiced in mirrors. "Mrs. Brooks," the woman said warmly, "I'm Angela Porter from Stonebridge Financial." Evelyn didn't stop trimming. "And this is my colleague, Daniel Price." "Morning," Daniel added. Evelyn looked up. "You're persistent." Angela smiled tighter. "We'd like to speak privately." "No," Evelyn replied. "You may speak plainly." Daniel cleared his throat. "We are here to apologize for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Evelyn echoed softly. Angela rushed in. "A regrettable clerical oversight. We take full responsibility." Evelyn leaned on her shears. "You sent police to my door." Angela's smile faltered. "We'd like to offer compensation," Daniel said quickly, "for the distress." Evelyn shook her head. "You don't pay for dignity after you try to take it." Angela inhaled. "Mrs. Brooks, with respect, this situation is escalating." Evelyn met her eyes. "Because it should." From across the street, James Carter approached, phone in hand. "Morning," he said coolly. "I was hoping you'd come back." Angela stiffened. "Mr. Carter." James nodded. "My office has received 12 calls this morning alone, similar cases." Daniel frowned. "We are handling it internally." James smiled without humor. "The public doesn't trust internal anymore." A neighbor stepped onto her porch, phone raised. Another followed. The quiet street began to feel crowded. Angela lowered her voice. "Mrs. Brooks, we'd like to resolve this quietly." Evelyn straightened. "Quiet is what let this happen." The sedan drove away shortly after. By noon, Evelyn's mailbox overflowed. Letters from strangers, handwritten notes, copies of old deeds, photos of grandparents standing proudly in front of houses that no longer belonged to them. One envelope stood out. Inside was a yellowed photograph. A younger Evelyn stood beside her late husband, keys in hand, the same house behind them. On the back, written in shaky ink, "We fought too late. Thank you for fighting now." Evelyn sat at the table for a long time after that. That afternoon, the city council announced a hearing, an emergency session. Topic: property rights in elderly homeowners. James read the announcement aloud. "They want you there," he said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "They always want you there after the fire." Still, she nodded. "I'll go." The council chamber buzzed with tension.
Cameras lined the walls, advocates filled the seats, reporters whispered. Evelyn walked in slowly, leaning on her cane, dressed in her Sunday coat. The room fell quiet. She took her seat at the witness table. A councilman cleared his throat. "Mrs. Brooks, thank you for being here." Evelyn looked around. "You're welcome. Can you tell us what happened?" She did. She spoke plainly. No theatrics, no anger, just facts. "When someone tells you to leave your own home," she said, "it doesn't matter how polite they are. The fear is the same." A woman in the audience wiped her eyes. "And if I hadn't kept my papers," Evelyn continued, "I would be gone. Not because I was wrong, but because I was old." Silence pressed in. A councilwoman leaned forward. "What do you want to see changed?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Respect and memory, because forgetting people is the same as erasing them." Applause broke out before anyone could stop it. Stonebridge Financial released a statement that evening. "We regret the distress caused to Mrs. Brooks and are conducting a full internal review." Evelyn read it aloud to Mrs. Turner and shook her head. "Regret doesn't rebuild trust." Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across Magnolia Street. The house stood firm, but far beyond it, something had cracked, and for the first time in a long time, the system felt nervous, because when one woman refused to move quietly, others began to stand up too. And tomorrow, Evelyn Brooks would learn just how many.
By the time the sun rose the next morning, the tone had shifted. Not softened, sharpened. Evelyn Brooks felt it before she saw it. The street was louder than usual. Cars slowed more often. Strangers lingered a little too long at the corner. And when she stepped onto her porch to collect the paper, a man in a crisp gray suit stood waiting by the mailbox like he belonged there. He smiled the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, tipping his head, "I'm Harold Keene, legal counsel for Stonebridge Financial." Evelyn didn't return the smile. "You people sure wake up early." Keene chuckled lightly. "When reputations are at stake, sleep becomes optional." She folded her arms. "Say what you came to say." He gestured toward the house. "This property has become complicated." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "It's been simple since 1962. Keene exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Brooks, the bank is willing to settle this matter generously." "I told your colleagues no." "This is different," he said smoothly. "This includes relocation assistance, long-term care coverage, a cash payout that would make your remaining years very comfortable." Evelyn stepped closer, close enough to smell his cologne. "You don't buy history, and you don't rent my silence." Keene's smile thinned. "Public sympathy is fickle, stories fade, and when they do, paperwork has a way of resurfacing." Evelyn tilted her head. "Is that a threat?" He raised his hands. "A reality." From across the street, James Carter approached again, slower this time, measured. "Morning," James said. "You must be Mr. Keene." Keene nodded politely. "And you are?" "Someone who doesn't like bullies in suits." Keene's eyes flicked between them. "We're trying to resolve this professionally." James smiled. "Then stop showing up uninvited." Keene turned back to Evelyn. "Think about the offer." "I already have," she said. "No." He paused, then leaned in slightly. "This won't end the way you think." Evelyn met his stare. "I've buried a husband and survived segregation. You don't scare me." Keene straightened and stepped back. "We'll be in touch." As his car pulled away, Evelyn's knees trembled just a little. Not from fear, from anger. Inside, the phone rang before she even reached the kitchen, then again and again. By noon, Evelyn had received 6 calls: a zoning office, a tax assessor, a city clerk just verifying records, each polite, each persistent, each asking the same question in different words. "Are you sure you belong here?"
James arrived with lunch and a grim expression. They're applying pressure, quiet pressure. Evelyn nodded. That's how they've always done it. By mid-afternoon, the first letter arrived. Notice of property reassessment. Then another, request for title verification. Mrs. Turner brought them over, her hands shaking. They're trying to bury you in paper, she whispered. Evelyn sat at the table, sorting them carefully. They think I'll get tired. They think age means weakness. James leaned back in his chair. They underestimated you. That evening, the neighborhood changed tone. 2 patrol cars cruised Magnolia Street slowly, lights off but presence loud. A young officer knocked on Evelyn's door. Yes, she asked calmly. Just checking in, ma'am, routine. On what? He hesitated. Reports of unrest. Evelyn smiled faintly. The only unrest here is paperwork. He nodded awkwardly and left. Across the city, Stonebridge executives gathered again. The mood was tense. She's not backing down, someone snapped. We warned you this would happen if we mishandled the archives, another replied. The CEO slammed his hand on the table. I don't care how old she is, this cannot spiral. A woman near the end of the table spoke up. It already has. Advocacy groups are asking questions. And regulators, someone added. Silence fell. Then discredit, the CEO said quietly. How? Find inconsistencies, family disputes, anything. That night, Evelyn dreamed of her husband. He stood in the doorway, younger, smiling. Hold your ground, he said. She woke before dawn to the sound of footsteps, not inside, outside. She peered through the curtain. A man with a camera stood across the street, pretending to photograph flowers. Her phone buzzed. James, they're digging into your past. Be ready. By morning, an article surfaced online. Questions raised about eviction case. Family members dispute ownership. Evelyn read it twice, then laughed. They found my niece, she said calmly. James frowned. She's claiming partial inheritance. Evelyn nodded. She hasn't visited in 15 years. The comments were vicious. Old people cling too long. Maybe it's time to move on. Evelyn closed the laptop. That's how they turn people, she said, against each other. But something unexpected happened. Neighbors responded. Mrs. Turner posted photos of Evelyn's garden from decades ago. A retired teacher shared records of community meetings hosted in the living room. A former student wrote about studying at Evelyn's table. The narrative fractured. By evening, a new hashtag trended locally. Hashtag Magnolia Stays. The next knock came after dark. This time it wasn't polite. 2 men stood on the porch, one uniformed officer, one plainclothes. Mrs. Brooks, the officer said, we need to ask you some questions. About what? An anonymous report. James stepped forward. She doesn't answer questions without counsel. The plainclothes man smirked. This doesn't have to be difficult. Evelyn stepped past James. I'm not difficult, she said. I'm rooted. The officer hesitated, then cleared his throat. Ma'am, we'll be watching. After they left, the house felt smaller. Evelyn sat alone in her living room, deets spread open on the table. She traced the ink with her finger. The year she and her husband planted the oak out front. The year they painted the walls themselves. The year she learned that ownership wasn't just legal, it was personal. Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. You can still walk away with dignity. Evelyn typed back slowly. Dignity doesn't walk away. She set the phone down. Outside, Magnolia Street stood quiet but watchful. And somewhere deep in the machinery of power, a decision was being made. They could retreat or they could push harder. And Evelyn Brooks knew, with a certainty
that settled into her bones. They were about to push hard.
The push came at dawn, not with sirens or shouting, but with silence. Evelyn Brooks noticed it when the street felt too still. No morning joggers, no passing delivery trucks. Even the birds seemed to hesitate before landing on the oak tree her husband had planted 63 years earlier.
She stood at the window, tea cooling in her hands, watching a black SUV idle at the far end of Magnolia Street. Waiting. "They're done testing," she murmured to herself. "Now they're committing." By 8 a.m., the first call came, then the second. By 10, 3 different agencies had requested urgent clarification of her ownership status. James arrived just before noon, jaw tight. "They're escalating legally," he said, "and politically." Evelyn motioned for him to sit. "Tell me straight." "Stonebridge filed a quiet motion overnight," James said. "They're asking the county court to invalidate the 1962 deed based on an alleged clerical error." Evelyn's eyebrows lifted. 63 years later? "They're claiming the notary stamp was non-compliant." She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "That stamp came from City Hall," she said. "I watched the clerk press it herself." James nodded. "That's why this matters, because if that deed stands, it exposes more than just this house." Evelyn leaned back. "Talk to me." James took a breath. "The land Stonebridge sits on. A lot of it was seized during urban renewal in the late 60s. Black families pushed out, titles altered, records lost." Evelyn closed her eyes slowly. "So my house is a loose thread." "And if you pull it," James replied, "the whole sweater unravels." The SUV outside rolled forward 10 feet. Evelyn stood. "Then let's pull." That afternoon, something unexpected arrived. A box. No return address. Inside were folders, brittle, yellowed, carefully labeled. Magnolia Street, 1959 to 1965. James's hands trembled as he opened them. "These are archived zoning maps, original plats." Evelyn frowned. "Who sent them?" James shook his head. "Someone who doesn't want to be seen." Inside the folders were copies of land surveys, handwritten notes, and buried at the bottom, a memo. "Insure Brooks parcel excluded. Title verified. Do not alter." Dated March 3, 1962. Signed by a city official whose name still appeared on a downtown courthouse plaque. Evelyn's eyebrows lifted. 63 years later? James looked up, slowly. "This proves intent," he said. "They knew your property was valid." Evelyn sat down hard. "So every threat," she said quietly, "every letter, they were bluffing." "Worse," James replied. "They were lying." By evening, the neighborhood buzzed. James made calls, emails flew, copies were scanned. And by nightfall, someone leaked the memo. Not to social media, to a reporter. At 9:17 p.m., Evelyn's phone rang. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Karen Liu with Channel 7. We just received documents suggesting Stonebridge knowingly targeted your home despite confirmed ownership. May we speak with you?" Evelyn looked at the deed on the table. "Yes," she said, "you may." The interview aired at 11. By midnight, the city was awake. Screens filled with side-by-side images, Evelyn's modest home in Stonebridge's glass towers. The headlines scrolled beneath. "Documents suggest bank new elderly homeowner held legal deed, still pursued eviction." Phones rang across Magnolia Street. Neighbors knocked, voices hushed but urgent. "They're talking about it everywhere," Mrs. Turner said, eyes wide. "Everywhere." Across town, Stonebridge's boardroom erupted. "Who leaked it?" the CEO roared. No one answered. "Pull the motion now," someone urged. "It's too late," another said. "The Attorney General's office just called." Silence slammed down. Back on Magnolia Street, police cruisers returned, but this time they didn't stop at Evelyn's house. They parked at the corner, watched, protected. James exhaled. "That's new." Evelyn smiled faintly. Truth has a smell, she said. Once it's out, people notice. The next morning, a woman knocked on Evelyn's door. Mid-30s, professional, nervous. My name is Lila Henderson. I used to work in Stonebridge's records department. Evelyn studied her. Used to? Lila swallowed. I was fired last night. James stepped closer. Why? Because I refused to destroy documents, and because what's happening to Mrs. Brooks isn't an accident. She pulled a flash drive from her bag. This contains scanned titles from 6 neighborhoods, all altered, all sold. Evelyn's hand tightened around the doorframe. How many families? Lila's voice shook. Hundreds. James looked at Evelyn. This just became criminal, he said. Evelyn nodded. Then it belongs to the light. By noon, federal investigators arrived. By 2, Stonebridge's stock dipped. By 4, a class action inquiry was announced. And by sunset, the SUV at the end of Magnolia Street was gone. Evelyn sat on her porch as neighbors gathered quietly. No cheering, no celebration, just a shared stillness. Mrs. Turner squeezed her hand. You held the line. Evelyn looked at the oak tree, leaves whispering in the breeze. No, she said softly. We did. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time, the message read, We underestimated you. Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't need to, because the truth was no longer hers to defend alone. It had found its voice, and it was speaking loudly.
The courthouse steps had never felt so heavy. Evelyn Brooks stood at the bottom, leaning slightly on her cane, the marble rising before her like a memory she had carried her entire life. Cameras lined the sidewalk, microphones bobbed like anxious birds. Reporters whispered, producers gestured, and strangers, dozens of them, stood silently behind the barricades. They weren't here for spectacle. They were here for history. James adjusted his tie beside her. Once we walk in, it's out of our hands. Evelyn smiled faintly. It's been out of my hands since 1962, she said. I've just been holding the proof. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with restrained tension. Stonebridge's legal team filled one side, expensive suits, sleepless eyes, confidence cracking at the edges. On the other side sat Evelyn, James, and rows of community members who had taken off work, brought folding chairs, and refused to stay silent any longer. The judge entered. All rise. Evelyn rose slowly, every bone reminding her of years spent cleaning houses, raising children, surviving in a city that had tried repeatedly to forget people like her. She stood anyway, because this wasn't just about a house. It was about whether truth still mattered when power tried to erase it. The proceedings moved quickly, too quickly for Stonebridge. James presented the evidence, the 1962 deed, the notarized stamp, the zoning maps, the internal memo, the whistleblower testimony, the altered records. One document after another, each one a nail. Stonebridge's lead attorney attempted composure, but his voice betrayed him. These records are inconclusive. James didn't raise his voice. They are conclusive. They are just inconvenient. The judge adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing. Counsel, she said to Stonebridge, why did your institution pursue eviction when internal documents clearly stated Mrs. Brooks' title was verified and untouchable? The attorney hesitated. Silence stretched. I asked you a question. Finally, he swallowed. Because the land was valuable. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn closed her eyes. There it was. No confusion, no mistake, no accident. Just greed. The judge leaned back. This court finds that the eviction attempt against Mrs. Evelyn Brooks was not only unlawful, but conducted in bad faith with full knowledge of her legal ownership. Stonebridge's team stiffened.
I am referring this matter to the state and federal authorities for criminal investigation, including but not limited to fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful displacement. A gasp. Then, I further rule that Mrs. Brooks' deed dated 1962 is valid, enforceable, and permanent. Evelyn's hands trembled. This property, the judge concluded, belongs to her, and it always has. The gavel struck. Once. Final. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then it happened. Not applause, not cheering. People stood, quietly, respectfully. Evelyn remained seated, tears slipping down her cheeks. James knelt beside her. "You won." Evelyn shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I remembered." Outside, the sun had shifted. Lights spilled across Magnolia Street as if it had been waiting. Cameras surged forward. "Mrs. Brooks," a reporter called, "what does this victory mean to you?" Evelyn stepped to the microphone slowly. She looked past the cameras, past the headlines, past the noise. She looked at the faces, young, old, black, white, Latino, Asian, neighbors, families, strangers who had shown up because something in her fight felt familiar. "It means," she said, voice steady, "that paper can't erase people, and time can't bury truth if someone is willing to carry it." She paused. "This house isn't just wood and brick. It's memory. It's sacrifice. It's proof that we were here and that we mattered." The clip went viral, but not for drama, for dignity. Within weeks, everything changed. Stonebridge executives resigned. A class-action lawsuit formed. Dozens of families came forward with deeds they had been told were worthless. And across the city, a quiet reckoning began. At Evelyn's home, Magnolia Street bloomed. Neighbors repainted fences. Volunteers repaired porches. Children played under the oak tree again. One afternoon, a young woman knocked on Evelyn's door. "My grandmother lost her house in '71, she said softly. "We thought it was our fault." Evelyn took her hand. "It wasn't," she said. Months later, the city installed a small plaque at the corner of the street. Magnolia Street, preserved through community resilience. Evelyn read it once, then went inside to make tea. Life didn't become perfect. Her knees still ached. Bills still arrived. The world still moved too fast. But at night, when she sat in her living room, the walls held steady. The deed lay framed above the mantel, not as a trophy, as a reminder that sometimes when power pushes too far, all it takes is one woman who refuses to move, and a piece of paper that remembers what the world tried to forget.